Back in high school, my friends and I had a hangout spot like no other. It was this decaying outdoor amphitheater hidden behind the abandoned community center at the edge of town. We always thought that we'd get there one day and there'd be a demolition crew tearing the old concrete shell down to the dirt. But they never came, at least not when we were kids. We all thought it was because our town was just too broke to bother, which was probably true. But it's not like it was prime real estate either. It was built right on the lip of Blackwood Ravine, where the tree line swallowed the property far away from the main roads. It was essentially a dead zone, just like the rest of our town. The reason we enjoyed going there so much was because no one else did. People would occasionally break into the community center to smash a window or spray paint the walls. Sometimes the cops would cruise by the front lot, but they never ventured out back to the amphitheater stage. It was a safe haven for our friend group. That was really important because a lot of my friends didn't exactly have the best home lives, especially one of them, Leo. His stepdad was a nightmare, always finding a reason to kick him out or start a screaming match. Yet when we were at the amphitheater, there was nothing anyone could do to us. We spent a lot of summer nights sitting on the cracked, weed-choked stone tiers, smoking and talking about God knows what to pass the time. I loved that place. We all did. Although, even before it happened, there was this one thing that always creeped me out about it. Attached to the top of the rotting acoustic shell, there was a single, buzzing, sodium vapor floodlight that somehow still had power. The city must have forgotten to cut the grid to it. It emitted this sickly, pale yellow hue, and since it was the only light out there, we'd be completely shrouded in it. It didn't light up the area very well either. Whenever I'd get a little too high, I'd look out past the concrete stage and into the ravine, which was just a wall of pure, impenetrable darkness. I'd think about how someone, or something, could easily stand just 10 feet deep in those trees, watching us, and we'd have absolutely no idea. It used to really get on my nerves. But then eventually someone would tell a joke or ask me for a lighter, and I'd forget about the thought. For a little bit, at least. I wonder how many times they watched us. I'll never know. During the beginning of summer, one night, my friend Mark and I were heading up to the amphitheater. I must have left my house before he did, because by the time I pulled into the hidden dirt lot, his car was nowhere to be seen. I decided to get a head start and walk back to the stage alone. This was pretty frowned upon in our group. Even though we all liked to think we were tough, walking along the edge of Blackwood Ravine alone at night wasn't exactly in our repertoire. I always kind of enjoyed the thrill, though. I walked past the hollowed-out community center and down the paved path to reach the stone seating. I waited another 10 minutes or so, but Mark hadn't shown up, so I sat down and started to smoke. 30 minutes passed. Nothing. At this point, the thrill had worn off completely. The buzzing of that yellow light was starting to drill into my skull, and I just felt deeply uncomfortable. I decided to walk back to my car. I ended up jogging just because of how exposed I felt. I texted him a couple of times, yet he never answered. So I spent another 10 minutes sitting in my locked car in the dirt lot and then just drove home. When I woke up the next morning, I saw that he never texted back. I was a little pissed off, but I didn't think much of it until later in the afternoon when my mom asked me if I'd seen Mark recently. I hit up all our friends, but they knew as much as me. The last time we all saw him was when we were hanging out at the amphitheater 2 nights ago. A day passed, then another. Soon enough, everyone in town knew. Search parties started running rampant through the ravine. My friends and I even went on a few ourselves, but we never found him. No one did. To this day, his body was never recovered. At the time, I tried to make myself believe that he simply ran away. He was an adventurous kid. He talked about wanting to travel out west all the time, about how this Rust Belt town made him feel claustrophobic. But deep down, I knew he wouldn't just leave like that. He would have at least left us a note, probably tucked under a rock on the amphitheater tiers where no one else would find it. After about a month, I went back to the amphitheater. This time, I went alone. I was so angry at the world that I didn't care if I got mauled by a coyote or whatever was lingering in those woods. But just as I cleared the tree line and stepped into the pale yellow light, I froze. There were people on the stage. For a second, I thought it was just my friends, considering we had never seen anyone else out there before. But they weren't. I had never seen these people before in my life. 3 of them were sitting on the edge of the concrete stage, their legs dangling, completely motionless. They looked like statues, but they weren't the ones that creeped me out. There was another man. He was standing dead center under the yellow light, waving his arms around rhythmically. He was mimicking the motions of a conductor leading an orchestra, but with this violent, jerky energy. It made me sick to my stomach to see how happy he looked. He had this massive, ecstatic, wide-eyed smile stretched across his face, practically crying with joy while conducting to absolute dead silence. At the time, I figured the guy must have been heavily tweaking on something. Now I just think he's a damn psycho. Worst of all, he looked familiar. I couldn't pinpoint him, though. It's like seeing an unfamiliar face in a dream. I knew that I had seen him somewhere before, but I just had no idea where. I couldn't handle it. The whole scene was just so incredibly wrong. I backed up into the shadows and tried to get out of there as quietly and quickly as I could. Luckily, they didn't follow. At least I don't think they did. When I got back to the dirt lot, my first thought was to get in my car and hightail it out of there, but I didn't follow that instinct. Instead, I drove my car around the front of the old community center lot. Tucked away in the back corner by the dumpsters, I saw a car. I knew the model. It was a faded blue Subaru Outback. It was the exact same one Mark drove. My heart dropped. But just as I spotted it, the headlights flicked on, blinding me. I abruptly threw my car in reverse and got the hell out of there. As summer went on, I couldn't get the image of that conductor out of my head. I told all my friends about it, and they agreed it was weird, but they didn't think much of it. I even completely stopped going to the amphitheater because of them. On a late July day, I was feeling pretty nostalgic and sad, thinking about Mark. I went into my closet and dug out a stack of Old Town newsletters and Parks Department brochures my mom used to collect. I was just thumbing through them to catch up on some old memories. That's when I found him. In a newsletter from 2011, one of the groundskeepers was standing in the background of a ribbon-cutting photo for a new playground. As soon as I saw the page, I knew it was him. Same gaunt face, same wiry hair. It was the man from the stage. It had to be. I couldn't believe it. I told my friends, but they didn't know what to do. Eventually, I went to the cops. I'm pretty sure they thought I was having a mental breakdown, but they still ran a background check on the name listed under the photo. At least that's what they told me. They couldn't find a thing. Even the man's social security records didn't lead anywhere. I attempted to do some digging online myself, but I couldn't find a trace of him. The man was a damn ghost. Near the end of the summer, I went back to the amphitheater one last time with a few of my friends. I couldn't shake the feeling that I was being watched. Every time I looked into the black abyss of the ravine, I felt terrified. I longed for the feeling of safety I once had there, but I knew it wasn't coming back. This place was no longer a home to me. When I left that night, I never came back. Near the very end of August, I was at a 24-hour Shell gas station just outside of town. It was early in the morning, so I was pretty groggy. I was standing by the coffee machines until I saw him. The conductor? The groundskeeper. He was at the register buying a pack of cigarettes. It looked exactly like him. At first, I thought my mind was just playing tricks on me, traumatized by the summer, but the longer I looked, the more convinced I became. Then he turned, saw me staring, and smiled that same wide, ecstatic smile. He hurried out of the glass doors, and I followed him out into the humid morning air. One of his buddies was parked curbside by the ice machine. He rushed over, got in the passenger side, and the car sped away before I could even think to confront him. But what I saw horrified me more than anything else. The car they were driving was a matte black SUV, but the license plate, it was the same as Mark's. I knew it because he had a very specific plate, M4C 819. It was the exact same car I had seen hidden by the dumpsters a month prior. Then it clicked. That was Mark's Subaru. They just got a cheap matte black paint job to cover up the faded blue, so I didn't notice it at first glance. But I should have. I still beat myself up over it. I never saw him again, or the car. Nowadays, it's all just a memory, one that I wish I could forget. It was the summer of 2023, and my three buddies, Chris, Tyler, Ben, and I, were desperate for a break from our environmental science grad program at the university. We had been buried in soil and climate data for weeks, but as photography geeks, we craved a night under a pristine sky to shoot some long-exposure astrophotography. We pored over light pollution and topographic maps, zeroing in on a remote clearing deep in a place called the Devil's Washbowl, a dense, notoriously rugged, and damp stretch of forest in the Pacific Northwest. The name came from an old local legend about a 1920s logging crew that supposedly vanished overnight, leaving only their axes deeply embedded in the trunks of the massive Douglas firs. The area was supposedly cursed. We brushed it off. Ghost stories were for kids. We just wanted the stars. Our safe haven was a rented A-frame cabin off a forgotten county road about 40 miles from the forest's edge. After lab work that Friday, we piled into my Subaru Forester and Ben's Jeep Cherokee, loaded with blankets, snacks, and heavy camera tripods. We didn't bring any camping gear since we'd been planning to sleep back at the cabin. The 6-hour drive from campus was grueling, and we hit the A-frame late, dropping our bags. The final stretch into the Devil's Washbowl was brutal. It was a narrow, muddy logging trail twisting through thick pines and steep drops, the air heavy with fog and the occasional snap of a branch in the deep woods. With zero cell service, we used walkie-talkies to stay connected between the cars, their static crackles cutting through the dark. Around 2 a.m., we reached the clearing. We were tired but buzzing. The sky was unreal. Out there, the Milky Way was blazing so brightly it felt like you could reach up and grab it. We spread out the blankets, set up the tripods, and dove into our camera settings. 15 minutes later, Tyler's voice hissed over the walkie-talkie from the Jeep. He said, "Yo, you see that?" Headlights. My gut twisted. We turned, and a faint glow crept along the muddy trail we had just driven in on. Out here, 40 miles from the nearest town, at 2 a.m. in a massive, unlit forest. Nobody is just passing by. Whoever was out there was trouble. Chris, who was standing by the Subaru with me, grabbed his walkie-talkie. "Flash them. See what they do." I flicked the Subaru's headlights. 3 sharp bursts. An old lifted Chevy pickup truck, rusted out and battered, rolled to a stop about 100 yards down the trail. There was no honk, no friendly wave, no nothing. Then we saw them. Shadowy figures stepping out of the cab. 2 or 3. It was hard to tell in the glare of the beams. They didn't walk towards us. They just stood there by the truck doors, staring. And that's when we heard it. Not voices, but a faint, rhythmic whistling. It was low, echoing through the damp trees in this unnerving, synchronized harmony. "This is messed up," Ben crackled over the radio. Tyler sounded genuinely spooked. "Nobody's out here at 2 a.m. for anything good." I swung my high-powered flashlight toward them, but the beam didn't quite reach, catching only the fog and the outlines of the trees. That whistling just kept going. Soft, slow, and completely sinister. It made my skin crawl. Chris tried to stay cool. "Maybe just weird locals, but let's move," he said. We agreed over the walkies to pack up and find another spot further down, but we set a rule. If those lights showed up behind us again, we were racing back to the safety of the A-frame cabin. We scrambled into the cars. Chris and I in the Subaru, Ben and Tyler in the Jeep. I floored it, the Forester jolting over deep ruts and thick tree roots that scraped the undercarriage like claws. I checked my rearview mirror. Those headlights were glued to us. High beams blinding me through the fog. Chris was on the walkie-talkie, practically yelling, "Ben, you guys good?" Ben replied back, his voice shaky, "They're right on our bumper, right there." We were 40 miles from help, just 4 young, basically defenseless grad students at 2 in the morning in a place called the Devil's Washbowl. You don't meet good people out there. I pushed the Subaru to its absolute limits, Ben's Jeep swerving right behind me. We sped about a mile down a secondary trail, found another small clearing hidden behind a thick grove of pines, and killed our lights. We sat in total darkness, panting, just waiting. 5 minutes in, Ben's voice cut through the walkie-talkie. It sounded urgent. "They're back," he said. My heart sank. Those exact same headlights sliced through the trees, slowly illuminating the fog at the edge of our clearing. Much closer now. Then came the gut punch. The Chevy's engine revved, a massive, roaring surge of power. They were doing it as a threat. Tyler yelled over the radio, Get us out now! I slammed the car into drive and hit the gas. We tore out of the clearing, sliding in the mud. The trail veered sharply in one direction, and for a split second, as we took the turn, the headlights of the truck tailing us vanished behind the trees. I prayed we'd lost them, but shortly after, they were back in my mirror. It felt like they were just toying with us, knowing we were trapped in this maze of logging roads. We hit a fork in the trail, and I violently swerved right, hoping to God it led back to the main mountain pass. The truck followed. Finally, after what felt like an eternity of pure panic and stress, the gravel turned to slick pavement, and a faded state highway sign appeared ahead in the mist. We blew past it. I glanced back, expecting those blinding high beams to follow us onto the asphalt, but they were gone. Ben's Jeep pulled up beside us as we stopped on the muddy shoulder of the highway. We just sat there, gripping our steering wheels, staring into the dark tree line. All we heard now was the light rain hitting the windshield and the crackle of the radios. The drive back to the A-frame cabin was dead silent. We stumbled inside and bolted the heavy wooden door, but even that safe haven felt entirely unsafe after what we had just faced. Who were they? We considered the possibilities. Illegal loggers, meth cooks running a lab out in the woods, or something tied to those old legends of the Washbowl. At 2 a.m. in a place like that, nobody is out for a good time. The way they watched us, the way they whistled in the dark, and the way they chased us without ever trying to run us off the road. It wasn't a prank. It felt like they wanted us to be afraid, like they fed off it. We never went back. We don't talk about it either. Not on campus, not anywhere. But whenever I'm driving down lonely, fog-covered roads at night, I think just a little part of me has permanently become hyper-aware. In January 2024, I took a solo winter trip up to the Appalachian Mountains. My family has partial ownership of a massive, Gilded Age resort hotel near a tiny remote mountain town called Oak Haven in West Virginia. It's this sprawling Victorian-style estate built right into the side of a steep forested ridge overlooking a half-frozen river. The area surrounding the estate has a dark, heavy history. It was inhabited by isolated settlers back in the 1700s, and local folklore always considered the ridge to be cursed ground. My grandfather had told me a long time ago that when the hotel's foundation was being dug out in the 1920s, the builders unearthed a series of strange, primitive stone altars and collapsed archways buried in the dirt. Apparently, it was the ruins of some 18th century occult settlement that the history books had completely forgotten about. The last time I stayed at the estate was over a decade ago when I was a kid, so I was really interested in reliving the experience. Plus, I've always been into urban exploration, and I wanted to see if I could go off-trail hiking in the deep woods below the property to find any lingering traces of those ancient ruins my grandfather mentioned. When I arrived at the nearest regional airport, I rented a 4x4 and started the long drive up the mountain. It was snowing heavily and the visibility was terrible. A drive that should have taken an hour took almost 3. By the time I reached the estate around 9 p.m., I was exhausted. The hotel shuts down completely in the dead of winter. Tourists don't brave those mountain roads in January. There was absolutely no staff on site. I let myself in with a master key my family provided, finding myself completely alone in this massive, multi-story historic hotel. The feeling was incredibly surreal and deeply unsettling, just standing in this cavernous, silent lobby in the middle of nowhere. I grabbed a room key from behind the front desk, let myself into one of the third-floor suites, and just slept. The next morning, the snow had stopped, so I geared up and ventured into the woods below the hotel. The snow was untouched and deep, almost up to my knees, and trudging down the steep, rocky Appalachian terrain in heavy boots was absolute hell. I must have walked far enough into the valley to completely lose my sense of direction. When I checked my phone, there was no service at all. I had been hiking for about an hour and a half and had no idea where I was. I was boxed in by towering, snow-covered pines on all sides, and directly in front of me was a massive craggy hill. I figured if I climbed to the ridge, I could get a better vantage point to locate the hotel or a service road. The climb was brutal. The rocks were slick with ice, but about halfway up, Off to my right, I noticed a depression in the trees that looked like an old, overgrown logging path. I slowly traversed my way over to it. It was a wide dirt trail cutting straight up toward the summit. It was choked with dead, thorny brush, but I pushed through it until I finally reached the top of the ridge. That's when the path just vanished. It didn't fade out, it just abruptly ended at a sheer rock wall. I looked around the rock face and noticed a jagged fissure cut into the stone, about 20 feet up a steep embankment, hidden behind a thick veil of dead ivy. I scrambled up the icy rocks and found myself staring into the mouth of a dark, natural cave. Melting snow and mud had washed into the entrance, but the gap was just wide enough for me to squeeze my shoulders through. I clicked on my heavy-duty tactical flashlight and shined it inside. I could see a narrow, rocky throat that opened up into a wider cavern. As I stepped into the cave, a foul scent hit me like a physical wall. I don't know how to explain it perfectly, but the best way to describe it is that it smelled like a wet, feral animal, like a stagnant wolf den. The chamber in front of me was mostly bare dirt and rock, except for a large, crudely carved slab of slate sitting dead center. As I walked deeper into the freezing cave, my flashlight swept over the walls, revealing two smaller, pitch-black tunnels branching off into the depths of the mountain. I ignored them, keeping my beam focused on the back of the main room. There was a second stone slab there, but this one was hollowed out like a crude trough. I walked up to it, wiping away a thick layer of dust and cobwebs. To my absolute horror, the trough was filled with human bones. They were old, brown, and brittle. But that wasn't all. Resting on top of the skeletal remains was a massive, rusted iron rod, like a heavy forged blacksmith's tool, and scattered all around the bones were dozens of tarnished silver coins. They looked incredibly old, stamped with strange, unreadable symbols. I stood there, paralyzed by shock and disbelief. Then, operating on pure, dumb instinct, I reached down and pocketed one of the silver coins. Before I could even pull my hand back, a deafening crash echoed from deep within one of the side tunnels. I whipped my flashlight toward the pitch-black opening. The feral, animalistic stench suddenly flared up, becoming so potent it burned my throat and made the air feel toxic. Then I heard it, a rhythmic, heavy thudding coming from deep within the rock. It sounded like a massive hammer striking the stone, and it was getting closer. Panic completely rewired my brain. I don't know why, but I reached into the trough, grabbed the heavy iron rod resting on the bones, and held it up like a baseball bat. The light from my flashlight caught the end of it. It wasn't just a rod. It was a blunt iron spike. I backed away toward the entrance, my heart hammering against my ribs. The thudding grew louder, faster. That was the point where my fight or flight kicked in entirely. I dropped the flashlight, bolted for the cave exit, and squeezed through the rocky fissure. As I burst out into the freezing Appalachian air, a low, guttural vibration rumbled through the ground. I swear to God, the entire hillside shook. I jumped down the embankment, lost my footing on the ice, and violently tumbled down the snowy ridge. I dropped the iron spike somewhere in the snow during the fall, but I didn't even look back for it. I just got up and ran. I crashed through dead branches and deep snow drifts, tearing my jacket, running blind until my lungs burned. Eventually, I heard the faint hum of an engine. I burst through the tree line and found myself standing on the shoulder of a plowed mountain highway. I collapsed into the snow, gasping for air. A few minutes later, I managed to flag down a passing salt truck. The driver was a rough-looking local who was extremely reluctant to let a frantic, snow-covered stranger into his cab. But seeing the absolute terror in my eyes, he unlocked the door. After a strained conversation, I realized I had run almost 4 miles in the wrong direction from the estate. He dropped me off at the entrance to the hotel. I didn't even take my boots off. I ran up to the 3rd floor, threw everything I owned into my duffel bag, and got back into my rental 4x4. Being the only living soul inside that colossal empty hotel suddenly felt like a death sentence. I drove straight down the mountain to Oak Haven and stayed in a cheap roadside motel for the night. This story has a follow-up, though. When the resort finally opened back up for the spring season in late March, I got a call from the property manager. He was filing a police report and needed to speak with my family. He told me someone had broken into the hotel while it was snowed in. They had smashed through a heavy glass door on the ground floor patio, But surprisingly, nothing in the hotel was stolen. No TVs, no copper piping, no alcohol from the bar. Nothing was touched, except for the door to the specific third-floor suite I had slept in. He sent me a photo. The heavy oak door had been completely pulverized off its hinges. The wood was splintered and covered in deep, circular indentations, as if someone or something had spent hours bashing it in with a heavy, blunt iron object. I don't know if this is connected to what I woke up in that cave, but I still have that silver coin sitting in a lockbox in my apartment, and I am definitely never stepping foot on that estate again.